Welcome, friends, back to our class series on the topic of fear and how to overcome fear. Let us begin today with a prayer. Divine Mother, great Masters, beloved Guru, with you by my side, what is there to fear? Help us to face all challenges with courage and with you in our heart, guiding us in everything we do. Om Shanti Shanti. Amen. Again, welcome back. And today this is the fourth in a series of classes. Next week, the fifth class will be the last of our classes. So as I said, this evening, we're going to talk about fear. And we're going to talk about, specifically, we're going to talk about the fear of death. Something very, very instinctual that is, you could say, it's ingrained within us, is that the desire to preserve ourselves, the will to survive. You could say it's one of the most basic impulses in all creatures. Everybody is nobody or no creature, conscious being wants to die. They want to perpetuate existence. It's one of the basic elements of life itself. But before I go there, I'll remind you that last week we spoke about non-attachment, and I want to finish one part of non-attachment that I didn't mention. And honestly, thinking about it, it relates also to the topic we're going to speak today, which is death. In a sense, if we perfect this quality of non-attachment I'm going to mention here, it also, you could say, death has no fear for us. And that's the quality of contentment. You know, it's said, Patanjali does in the Yoga Sutras, that contentment is he doesn't say this, but it's often been related elsewhere, that it's the supreme virtue. And why is that? It's because the quality that comes to us when we perfect this quality of contentment, as you could say all the yamas, niyamas, when perfected, they give a certain powers, if you will, or certain qualities. And the one that comes with contentment is the experience of bliss. We're in the state of bliss. And so in a sense, you can see why it's the supreme virtue, because we are perfectly content in ourselves, meaning that there's no circumstances outside of ourselves that need to be fulfilled. In other words, we're completely fulfilled because we're content. And it's this quality that you can imagine. If I'm perfectly content, I don't need anything, and what happens outside of myself is not relevant to my state of consciousness, not relevant to my state of well-being. And so whether that is a very outwardly successful life, or perhaps other people might qualify it as less successful, but for yourself, it doesn't matter. And so too, if death comes, what does it matter? Because you're content in yourself. That's not dependent upon things of this world, particularly it's within yourself. And it reminded me of thinking about that. There was a story from the life of Paramhansa Yogananda, who had a little retreat house out in the desert in Southern California. And he would go there from time to time to get away from everything. And he would take the monks there with him. And one time he was there with the monks, and he pointed out he had a neighbor. This houses there in the desert are fairly well spaced out, but he pointed that he had a neighbor, and there was somewhat of an elderly gentleman there who lived by himself. He says, Look at that man. He's like a king in his castle, because the man, there was a simple house. This fellow had a simple house, and he was always happy, and he was, you could sort of think of a fellow who was whistling and just perfectly content in himself. But the outer circumstances were very, very simple. And he says, he's like a king in his castle. And he said, that's how we should be too, whatever the outward circumstances are. And so this is, you could say, the quality that if we can, to engender that, and something you could, we might say, well, how can I be content if I'm missing this, that, or the other thing in my life? Well, that's the point, isn't it? We want to be able to be content without that, but we can practice that. We can practice that. And it goes back to what I said last week. It's just like mentally building a fire at night and just throwing all of those things in there. But if you have been, I think all of us in our lives have been content at some point or another. Even you go to that fabled vacation that you've been looking for, maybe it's to the beach or the ocean or the seashore or something. And you get everything just right, and you've got your blanket or your lounge chair on the sand, and you got your cool drink there, and you sit down and you have that sense of, and you're, no worries. You're very content for maybe 5 minutes. But this is the point. Why does it have to only be 5 minutes? You see, we can practice contentment, and it's that feeling, that feeling of release that you feel when, I'm content. The tensions have melted away. And if you notice closely, yes, it's the mental tensions and the complexities that are somewhat gone, but it's also a feeling in the heart. When you're very content, the heart's emotions and feelings are at rest. And I think this is the major part. And when that's at rest, the mind follows the heart. When the heart is at rest, the mind generally will follow along. You can practice that. When you feel content, try to say, okay, remember that feeling of contentment. And then you begin to extend it. Now, contentment is not based upon, I don't have this worry or that worry. Because that's, you could say that you're always, to the degree that we're stuck in this duality, going to have worries. That's what we're trying to get over. But that feeling, if we can engender that feeling and recall it, because you could say it's like recalling that calmness in meditation. We try to feel very, very still. And that's part of contentment, that still, calm feeling, suffused with joy. And that in the moment, in the now. And if you can recall that, learn to recall that, and this is contentment. We do have, I hope we all have, at least once in a while, we do have that little feeling of contentment. Beautiful day, everything's nice, but it doesn't last, we know that. Until we can develop that inner quality, no matter what the circumstances are. And it doesn't mean being inefficient or continuing to lie on the seashore. It means in the midst of activity, you see. Why do we have to wait for the pleasant seashore experience? Why not be content right now? And that's, you could say, when we can do that, what's there to fear? I mean, this is you might say, to strengthen ourselves. And you could also think of it this way. You might think of, there's this visualization. You could sort of, when you're meditating, when you're feeling very calm, you're on the seashore maybe, think all of those little things that want to invade your calmness, invade you and make you worried about this, make you worried about that. Imagine each of them as a little bit of string is attaching you to those things. And mentally just go snip, 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 snip all those strings. And they're like helium balloons. If you cut the string, they just float away. And you can and what's left, of course, it leaves you in that state of peace. And so, in a sense, you can use these little exercises. But when you could say it's a good segue, you might say, this topic of contentment into what we're focusing on this evening is the topic of death. Of why if we're perfectly content, there's nothing to worry about. There's nothing to fear. And in a sense, we approach whatever comes, Lord. Let it come. I'm happy in your presence. And if it's life and the great successes, great. If it's less success, you might say, the difficulties, okay, I can deal with it. And if it's ultimately when the time comes, let it be. When the time comes to die, let that be. Because, when we speak about death, it's something we don't want to wait until that last moment and then say, oh my God, I have to get ready, to pass. And it's not going to happen that way. We're shaping in the moments of our life right now, those thoughts that are going to come to us, those feelings that are come to us when the time comes for us to pass. And I think the best or a good approach to all of this is like that story of the village lady, which Ramakrishna used to speak about, but it's been repeated many times. So the village lady would come to the home and clean the household, and she did a good job. She considered that household, the people there, the children there, she cared for as her own, and she gave full attention to them. But in the back of her mind, she always knew it was not her household, it was not her home, her family. Her home was in the village far away, which she would go once a week back to the village to visit her children in her home. But she was there doing her job, as the family housekeeper there. But her mind, there was a part of her mind was also realizing, I'm just a steward here. I'm serving here, but this is not my true home. My true home is back there. And I think in the same way, it's a good way to approach life. We do our very, very best. We take care of the home. We take care of the family. We take all care of everything here. But on a deeper level, we know on some part, I'm just here as a steward. I'm here for temporary time. But when that time's come, it's time to go home. It's time to go back to the village, my true home, which is not here on this earth. And since this is inevitable for all of us, and it's not something that we can avoid, why not prepare for it? And sometimes, too, people tend to avoid the subject entirely. So, I don't want to talk about those kinds of things. It's depressing. Well, why is it depressing? That's the problem. We don't want to be. We should say, yes, I get to go home, you might say, in a sense, because there's you might say, a better world for me, and we withdraw from this world of trouble and toil, because death and dying are actually, if we know it in the right way, death itself at least, should be something that is exalted for us, because we're returning to a higher plane. Our true home is not in this world of suffering. Now that I said death and dying, but dying itself for the average person is not necessarily pleasant, because there's fear. If there's no fear, well, of course, then it is something else entirely. And it's that fear that we want to address. Why? Why are we afraid of something like that? Well, of course, I mentioned already, it's instinctual. But in a sense, it's that sense of loss, sense of all those things that we're attached to, all of those things that we're not going to be able to fulfill all of those desires. And so you could say, since is inevitable, the time to start preparing for that is now. Is resolving those issues and seeing that this is not you could say that like that old saying, that when the baby is born, the baby cries, but everybody else in the room is happy. And when the old man dies or the old woman dies, everybody in the room is sad, but she's happy. And because you're leaving this world of trouble and pain, and often this is, in that sense, death can be a great release, particularly if a person is suffering physically, or mentally as well. So you could sort of say, why not look at it this way? Build that mental fire, and think of it, of returning. Is returning home. You could say, like, I've often thought of it in this way. It's like we're all in the military, and we've been given an assignment. And when you're on assignment and you're in the military, you do your job and you're part of the team, and you do the best you possibly can. But in the back of your mind, you're waiting for that the assignment's going to end and you get to return home, because we're in a foreign country, you might say. You're militarily assigned who knows where. It's not truly your home country, but when you go home to your true home. And so you could say that we're here, and this, what we think of as our home, is really not. It's a foreign territory. Our true home is with God in that when we return back. So what happens actually? And I think this is a little bit something to look into and think about just a little bit. What happens when we die? Of course, the soul, we know this, we're not the body. We're something beyond the body. We inhabit this body, and this body is of the physical plane. But when the body is given back, taken from us perhaps, it's not the end. The existence doesn't end. We return to the deeper state of consciousness of this body, which would be the astral world. And the body returns to the astral plane. And that astral plane, you could say, is the blueprint for what happens out here in this physical plane. And those who are awakened in a superconscious state in this world can, in this lifetime, in this physical body, we can become aware of this astral world. But for most people, it's something that animates the body. It's the blueprint for the physical world behind this body, but we're not really aware of it unless you have that ability. Now, Paramhansa Yogananda said most of his days, he said, most of my day is spent in the astral world. And you could and of course, there's beyond the astral world, the causal world as well. His consciousness was on that level. And when other people would go to sleep at night, he, of course, would go into states of samadhi, and he would roam in other planes besides this physical world. But that's not the common experience for us, of course. But yet, when this body is dropped, it's not non-existence. It's the soul is released from the body. And in that release, we begin to experience ourselves on that higher plane. Now, Paramhansa Yogananda did say for most people who are not awakened yet much, the experience after death, it tends to be a bit foggy. They tend to lose consciousness, and they go into a state of peace that's enjoyable in that sense, because it's not burdened by the trials and travails of this body, but they're not necessarily aware of that. It's you might say compare it to going to sleep, and it's every night you could say is like a mini death. We go to sleep and we roam around in the subconscious world with dreams, and then we awaken up again. And so it is for most people. They dream at night, just so they dream in the astral world, a bit unconsciously, not in control of it and not aware particularly. Or sometimes it's a very deep dream, no dreams. And they awaken again in a new body. Karma draws them back. But for the person a little bit more enlightened, a little bit aware, and you could say one of the goals and tests of the yogi is to be able to, at the point of death, is to maintain that awareness and that transition into the astral world. And Paramhansa Yogananda said for his disciples, those who are true to the end, and truly not just sticking it out, but truly faithful disciples, he promised all of us, he said, at the time of death, I or one of the masters will come and appear and usher you into the astral realm. And of course, passing from this body in more of a conscious state. And this is, you could say, one of the benefits of awakening our awareness in this lifetime to those realms beyond the physical, and just not drift off, and then karma brings us back. But yes, karma may bring us back even if we're a little bit more awakened, but to travel into that next world, into that astral realm and be guided there by the masters is a great promise, and for us to prepare ourselves for that. And when we die, the physical body, the life force that is entered into the body, it's said that when the baby is born, the life force enters through the medulla oblongata and descends from the astral world into the soul in the medulla oblongata, and begins to then develop from that point of conception, sperm and ova united in that point in the body itself is developed and through the nervous system in the embryo and ultimately into the body and is given birth. When we die, we reverse that course. The life force that is feeding us begins to depart the body, and it departs and ultimately leaves the body, and the body begins to close down. The senses begin to close down. Now, many people die with pain, physical pain, and you could say that pain is released because as we begin to lose the senses, there's a great sense of relief as the body itself. We don't feel the body, but that's not the first, you could say not the last sense to go. That begins to, you could say, awareness of the physical pains of the body begin to release. But one by one, the senses begin to shut down. And it said the last of the senses to shut down is the sense of hearing. And this is one reason that Master said, if somebody's dying in your presence, there's often a tradition of somebody, you could chant Om in their right ear, Om, so that to remind them of that higher consciousness, keep their mind there, keep their mind upwardly pointed. And if a person is a devotee and can actually experience the Om vibration and consciously entered into the Om vibration, that's a great blessing and boon to do so. But assuming most people cannot do that, Yoganandaji said, when you're in the presence of somebody is dying, be careful what you say. Don't be happy, send happiness. Make sure, try to have that person who's leaving the body leave in a state of upliftment, not in a state of sorrow, not in a state of regret, because those things are, you could say, magnetic to the soul and will bring the person back with that consciousness in the next life. Let them leave joyfully, and keep your thoughts, keep your mind, as if you're an onlooker, so that person leaves in a high state. But eventually, the body or the soul exits. I've told this story to some of you before, but I had a friend in Delhi who passed, and he consciously knew he was going to die, and he laid down on his bed and gathered all his family around him. And he said, I'm about to leave. And he was an elderly man, but he was a Kriyaband, his old sense of a young man. He was and a friend of Swami Kriyananda's. And as he began to leave the body, he began to explain it. He says, now the life force has left the lower limbs, and he couldn't feel the lower limbs anymore. And then he was having his family around him sing bhajans. And then he said, now the body has left the body parts as they work their way up until they got to the heart. And he says, now it's the life force is leaving. And he just started chanting, Om. And when it got to the heart, of course, the heart stopped. When it left released from the heart no longer beating, it stopped. And of course, he couldn't say anything more. And then he just went and he looked up in the spiritual eye, and the life force left. Now, for a conscious yogi, the life force, we want to direct that life force up through the spiritual eye, out into through the spiritual eye, if possible. For the average person, non-devotee, the person who's not as spiritually advanced, the life force ultimately leaves through the medulla oblongata and is in release. But to the degree of a person's consciousness is awake, and sometimes a little bit startled to find themselves without a body. And there's many stories, I'm sure we've read books that have been written about this, people's after-death experience. And oftentimes these people speak about seeing a great light. And then if you do see that light, go into that light. Sometimes they even speak about angelic beings or astral beings who come to guide them into that other world. And they're guided into the other world, and they look back. Don't be attached to that other, the world in which you left. There was a story, though, interestingly, that Yogananda related about a brother and sister who were very close, and not very aged either, so in the young side. And the brother came down with a malady, and he was on his deathbed. And he was about to pass, and he actually did seemingly start to die. He died, but his sister, who loved him very, very much, was calling. He says, "Don't go, don't go. I need you. And she was a devotee, and as was he. And he says, "Master said you don't need to go, and you can stay if your will is strong. And I need you here to be with me." And I don't know what the circumstances were, but he did come back, and he related, he says, yes, when afterwards, he said, I was about to go and I was just leaving the body and I could hear you. I could hear you calling me back, and I came back. Now, whether that was a good thing, I don't know, but nevertheless, it goes to that point of being careful what you say toward the end of your time, because the sense of hearing is the last sense apparently to leave. But we pass into that astral world, and of course our karma determines how long and where in those astral worlds we reside. Master said there are many, many worlds, many, many astral worlds, and we're drawn to those that are in harmony with our own consciousness. If a person seeks harmony, you're going to be drawn to places where that harmony will be, and you experience that depending upon your karma. If you're less than harmonious, let's say, you'd be maybe drawn to those areas. And we're drawn by the attraction of love to those people with who we have magnetism. We're drawn to those areas, those experiences, those souls in the afterworld. And so in a sense, the sense of departure when somebody else dies us, precedes us to the astral world, remember that those people that truly we have a magnetic attachment, their death is only temporary, and the earthly death is only temporary, and we meet all souls again in fulfillment. But of course, the astral world is not liberation by any means. There's karma there, and our time there is limited, and ultimately our karma, as I think it was Master who said, he says, yes, there comes a time when unfulfilled karma will begin to nag at you, pull you, until finally you're pulled back into the physical world and to re-establish your journey. Now, you might ask, well, why do I have to come back? Why can't I fulfill my karma there? Well, that's not possible on I said the astral world is more beautiful, more harmonious, more pleasant, but much of our karma can't be worked out in harmonious places. And it's a lot of perhaps those discords that we have, those negative things that we have yet, qualities that are less than harmonious need to be worked out in a plane where such things exist. And that's the physical plane, and the connections and the karmas that we have with other people, circumstances, and so forth. But for those things that karma that is related to beauty, those things, of course, as Swamiji would say, in the astral world, you experience those things, you're attracted to beautiful things, and the beautiful karmas that you have can be somewhat fulfilled there. But it's also, we must remember that the astral heavens, as they're spoken of in the various scriptures, this is not the ultimate goal. It's a temporary resting place, because that, on a deeper level, isn't our true home either. It's, you might say, another way station, ultimately, until we pass beyond. There's no need to come back for this physical karma, and ultimately we can perfect ourselves, and then ultimately advance to those realms of the causal world. Remember in the autobiography, Swami Sri Yukteswar said, he was explaining to Yogananda, he says, I've incarnated now on an high astral planet, I'd say, Hiranyaloka, preparing souls to be able to advance to ultimately the causal realm. But we're speaking here of what we want is to overcome that fear of death and that fear of transitioning. And the masters have said, and all the great ones have said, there is nothing to fear. Face it with the qualities that we've been taught of courage, contentment, the feeling that God is my companion, God is with me at all times. And if we can go forward with that, we find that not only do we need, what you might say is, not only is it in death that we find our happiness, but we find our heaven is right here with us right now. It's not far away. People think, well, when I get to the astral realms, or when I get to those heavenly realms, and it's the same, someday, why not now? And begin to live and make this existence, make this a heaven on earth, and at least inwardly. And in this way, we direct our energies in the most positive way. And so take this as you might say, as a message of consolation. So many people it's because, again, it's instinctual. We have to preserve. That's, you might say, an instinctual pull of the physical body that ultimately we have to overcome. And we don't do it forcefully, we let it go. And you find that inevitably it's that relaxation that is at the heart of it. When we totally relax, we're content. And you could say death itself is a relaxation, because I can imagine as we die, there's a certain tension of, oh, I want to hold on. And Yogananda said an interesting thing. He says, as long as if you have a very strong will, you will not pass. But ultimately you come to, but that will tends to be it's not spiritual will necessarily, it's ego-driven will. And it's that release until finally say, okay, it's time to go. And I allow it to go. And then that, is when we pass, when we die. Now, of course, if a person's less conscious of these things, it's often just taken from us. And we're still struggling. I want that. And we hold on. And you could say this isn't a good attitude of holding on. One, it draws us back to that. But also you could say that there's tales of, and the spiritual tradition says there's, it's astral spirits are people that are hanging on with great tension to this physical world, and they're not allowed to transition. It's even said that this is one of the benefits, of course, of cremation versus burial, that when we cremate the body, there's less of a tendency for the soul to hang on to that body if there's a great resistance. But I think for the more spiritually advanced person who has practiced in our lifetime, or imagined, you might say, preparing might be the better word, who is prepared. And I think every day is, you might say, we go to sleep at night, we don't know if we're going to wake up in the morning. So why not just give yourself into God, into that flow of spirit. And you could take it even further. Every kriya, if you're kriyaban, every breath that we do, let it feel, we're letting it out, I'm content in the moment. Who knows if I'm going to take another? If we approach this way, it gives us a sense of freedom. I'm in God's hands. I'm in your hands, Lord. And come what may, you will guide me. Come what may, you will be with me. And so give these some thought. There's no need to, I'm not saying to look forward to death, because that might be a little morbid, but accept it at least. And in some ways, I kind of am looking forward to it. Wow, that's really interesting. We think about it. It's there as a potential our whole life. I wonder what that's going to be like. But I think in a sense, that's a joyful curiosity. But yet, while I'm here, I've got my job to do, and I'm going to do it as best as I can. And we'll come back next week and conclude this series on death or fear that might come, whatever the circumstances might be, to engender that. God bless all of you, and until next week, joy to you.